Today I'd like to show you some of the most common Coptic binding beginner mistakes, and the good news is that almost all of them are easy to avoid or easy to fix. And even if something does go wrong, it usually doesn't mean your notebook is ruined. Most mistakes can be corrected, and sometimes you can even take the whole notebook apart and bind it again. Hi, I'm Joanna. Welcome back to my missredfox paper art channel. It's all about bookbinding and paper crafts for beginners here. So let's have a look at some common Coptic binding mistakes. Number 1. Too many sheets per signature. A Coptic bound book consists of 2 covers and several signatures, which are folded paper sheets. One of the first mistakes is simply using too many sheets in each signature. For printer paper or paper around 100 GSMs or grams per square meter, I usually use 4 sheets per signature. With thicker paper like watercolor paper, I often use only 2. The problem is that if you have too many sheets in a signature, the inner pages begin to stick out at the foredge. This is called creep or paper creep, and it's a normal result of nesting several folded sheets together in one signature. You could trim the foredges of the folded signatures with a guillotine before sewing, have them trimmed at a print shop, leave the uneven edges as they are, or minimize the creep by using fewer sheets in each signature. Or you could use deckled edges like here. They look organic and the creep is not so bad in that case. Number 2. Ignoring the paper grain. Paper grain matters just as much in Coptic binding as it does in other bookbinding projects. Ideally, the grain should run parallel to the spine of the notebook. That way, the pages turn more easily, the notebook opens better, and the paper is less likely to warp over time. The same applies to the covers. Ideally, both the cover paper, the cardboard, and the end papers should also have the grain running parallel to the spine. If you're not familiar with paper grain yet, I've made a separate video explaining how to find it and why it matters. I'll link it in the description. For these particular pages, I can make a simple folding test, so like here. It folds quite easily, and like so it has a bit of resistance, so I know that the paper grain runs in this direction. So actually I would need to make the signatures like this, but they would be too narrow and too long. So what I would do, I would trim the paper in half and then have a signature like here and a signature like here, respectively like this, and it would be okay. But if I decided that I need all the page, so like A5, I would fold it against the grain and fold it flat with my bone folder and put it in my book press for half a day or a couple of hours at least to have really flat signatures, and then I can use them. But ideally you would make a signature, you'd fold a signature going with the paper grain and not against it. Number 3. Front and back covers mixed up. This one has happened to me more than once. As you can see here, the front cover is correct, but the back cover is unfortunately upside down. So before you punch the holes in your covers, place them next to each other and decide which one will be the front cover and which one will be the back. If your decorative paper has a directional pattern like a map, text or flowers like here, you want to make sure that both covers face the correct way, like this and not like this. Also, you'll probably want to have the prettiest paper cut out for your front cover. So if I look at these, I actually like this one for the front cover, but because I cut them from the same piece of paper and the pattern continues, I will have this as my front cover. So if I look at the notebook when it's finished from behind, I see that the pattern continues from here to here. So this one will be my front cover. It's surprisingly easy to turn the back cover upside down before punching the holes, and this becomes even more important if you're planning to add an elastic bandler here or eyelets or another closure later, because those also have a specific top and bottom, and once you've punched the holes there is usually no easy way back, or no way back at all, and you'd have to discard that cover. So what I do after I decided which one is the front cover, I like to first place the 2 covers side by side, the front cover being on the right, and stack them exactly as they will appear on a finished book before I mark or punch anything. That way I only have to think about the orientation once. Unlike many other Coptic mistakes, this one is one of the few that can actually ruin a cover. So I always spend a few seconds checking the orientation before I pick up my awl. Number 4. Holes don't line up. If the holes in the signatures and in the covers don't line up, sewing eventually becomes more difficult and the finished book can look slightly off because the signatures and eventually the covers are not aligned. As you can see here, the second signature from the right is not aligned with the rest. And it looks off. It doesn't look perfect. The most common reason for this are letting the template, the punching template, moving while punching. So not clipping it together with the signature. Or accidentally turning one signature around if the whole pattern isn't perfectly symmetrical. So ideally, the whole pattern should be perfectly symmetrical. I like to keep the first and the last hole at the same distance from top and bottom edge and leave equal spaces between the sewing stations. This gives the finished spine a more balanced look. I usually draw my own hole template because I can adjust the spacing for every notebook size I make. Sometimes I also use this 3D printed punching cradle, but I usually remove the plastic hole guide that comes with it and use my own paper template instead. So I will place my signature here in this V shape and then put my template on it and then punch the holes. This way the cradle keeps the signature centered in a fold while I can still choose exactly where I want the holes. I also draw a small arrow on every signature pointing towards the top of the notebook. This helps me keep all the signatures in the same direction if the whole pattern turns out to be slightly asymmetrical. The reason why I don't use this one so often is because it comes with predefined holes. Each of them is 0.5 centimeters away from the other one, and not all my notebooks are on the same principle with multiplications of 0.5. So this is why I prefer to draw my own patterns and don't use this, but still use the cradle as a support for my signature. But of course, I could use the signature like this, clip the template in place, and then punch the holes like this. Number 5, twisted thread. This still happens to me all the time. Especially at the beginning of the sewing when it's still quite long, the thread loves twisting around itself. So don't fight it. Simply stop every now and then let the needle hang freely, like this. The thread untwists by itself and you are much less likely to end up with knots later. Number 6, knots in the thread. Sometimes, despite your best efforts, the thread still forms a knot by itself. Don't pull harder. That usually only makes the knot tighter. Try to loosen it first and eventually use the tip of your needle for this. So here is a knot in my thread and I will try to loosen it with the tip of my needle. And if that goes okay, it's fine and then you can unknot it. But if not, I would simply flatten the knot a little with the handle of my awl or with another heavy tool. And if you can't unknot it, just try to make it as small as possible and flatten it. And then sew a little more slowly while the knot passes between the signatures, because that's where it can catch most easily. So if this would be my book that I want to sew and I have a knot in my thread, I'm passing between the signatures, you can see that it stops here. So I will try to push it with my awl or simply open the book a bit more and then it passes through. Number 7, thread too loose. Loose stitches give the notebook too much movement. This is actually the very first Coptic bound notebook that I made years ago with paper that I made myself, recycled, and as you can see, it is way too loose. So if you notice a loose stitch, tighten it immediately. Don't continue hoping it will fix itself later, because it won't. So after every sewing station, tighten the thread before moving on. Number 8. Thread too tight. The opposite can also happen. If you pull the thread too tightly, especially when binding the covers, you create too much tension on the covers. The notebook won't close properly anymore and often wants to spring open by itself. So try using a little less tension while sewing, and pressing the finished notebook afterwards also helps the covers settle into their final position. I have 2 videos on handmade book presses, and I will link them in the description if you want to make yourself some. Number 9. Running out of thread. If your thread turns out to be too short, you have 2 options. You can tie on a new piece and continue sewing, or undo the binding and start again with a longer thread. Starting again takes more time, but it gives the cleanest result if you don't want an extra knot, and this is what I do if my thread is too short. But if you add a new thread, try to place the knot at one of the sewing holes inside of the signature rather than between 2 holes or at the outside of the signature. It will be less noticeable there, and it will sit in a place when the sewing already creates a little extra bulk. So what I do, if this is my thread and it's too short, I cut a thread that it's longer. Let's presume this is enough. And what I do, I make a knot in this one, a loose knot, and thread my existing too short thread through it until the knot is here at one of the sewing stations. And I tighten this one. And then make a double knot and cut all the short ends. Thread the new longer thread and continue sewing. It doesn't look perfect, but yeah, this is only one alternative that you have. You can undo everything and continue or start again with the longer thread instead. Number 10. Choosing the wrong thread. The thread is not only functional, it's also part of the design. A thread that is too thick, like this one, creates a bulky spine. A very thin thread makes the binding a little less stable. So choose according to your book size and paper weight. And don't forget the thread color. Since the spine stays visible, changing only the thread color can completely change the look of the notebook. For your first notebook, I'd actually choose a thread color that contrasts your cover, like here. It makes the stitches much easier to see while you're sewing on the cover and inside the signatures. Number 11. Not waxing the thread. I actually always recommend waxing the thread, but I sometimes don't do it if I use linen thread like this, which is thick or rough enough. It won't completely prevent tangles, especially if you're working with a very long thread, but it does make the thread easier to handle. More importantly, the chains and knots become more stable and the finished binding lasts longer. If you don't have beeswax yet, you can certainly sew without it or use a candle, but once you've tried a wax thread, you'll probably keep using it. And finally, sometimes a notebook simply doesn't turn out the way you want it. Maybe the sewing is too loose. Maybe one signature is upside down. Or perhaps you only notice a mistake after you finish the whole notebook. That does not automatically mean the notebook is ruined. I've taken apart more than one Coptic notebook over the years. So let's do it together. This one is too loose. I want to rebind it. So instead of trying to pull one long thread through the whole binding, which can damage the paper, and it's actually impossible because of all the knots, I cut the thread between every pair of signatures. Then I remove each little piece separately. And so on. Usually I can reuse both the covers and the signatures and simply sew the notebook again. Even after many years of bookbinding, I still occasionally decide that rebinding a notebook is the better solution. And this is what I will do with this notebook once I cut all the signatures apart. Every bookbinder makes mistakes. The important part isn't avoiding every single one. It's learning to recognize them, fix them, and avoid making the same mistake again. Every notebook teaches you something, and with every notebook you'll become a little more confident. I hope these tips help make your next Coptic notebook even better, and if you have your own tips or if you run into another problem while making a Coptic notebook, please let us know in the comments. I'm sure other beginners will appreciate your experience too. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Feel free to like and subscribe if you like this tutorial, and stay tuned for more bookbinding videos. Happy crafting!